Welcome to this latest video. In this video, we're going to be developing our more advanced programming skills. To really get the most out of this video, you should already be pretty confident at using sequence, selection, and iteration using for and while loops. In this video, we'll be looking at arrays, both one-dimensional and two-dimensional, subprograms including functions and procedures, and we'll be having a look at SQL statements. I'll be doing a brief recap of each of these topics just before I do the question, and the best way, as always, to use these videos is to always pause and attempt the question first. Okay, we're going to have a look at the use of arrays. Now, when you've used data before, you've used something called a variable to store a piece of data. Arrays are used when we want to store a group of data, so multiple bits of data. Let's use this question to understand what we're talking about. This question says that Elliot plays football for OCR Football Club. I'm sure it's a fantastic club. He wants to create a program to store the results of each football match they play and the names of the scorers. Elliot wants individual players from the team to be able to submit this information. The number of goals scored in each football match is held in an array called goals. An example of this array is shown here. So, do we see here? We're storing the number of goals. So in the first match, 0 goals were scored. The next match, 1 goal was scored, and 3 goals, and so on. Let's think about the alternative ways that we have of dealing with a problem like this. As mentioned, what we could make use of is the sense of variables. We could have a variable for each match, goals 1 for the first match, goals 2 for the second match, and we can store the values here. So, we can see that in the first game, 0 goals were scored, so I could store a 0 as a value here. Or indeed, we could say for the second game that 1 goal was scored. Now, can you see what we'd have to do now is we'd have to declare a new variable for each game we played. And that's because a variable can hold one piece of information. And if we want to change that information, we have to essentially remove what was there and put a new one in. So if we want to hold multiple bits of data, then we'd have to have multiple variables. How do we get around that? Well, we get around that by making use of variables. Let's zoom into our variable here. Let's actually have a look at what our variable looks like. So this is our array. It has one identifier, so one name to access it. It makes use of these square brackets, and then has all the values separated by a comma. Now you might be thinking, well, how do we access any of those individual values that's held inside the array? Good question. Well, what you have is the sense of something called an index. So this is at a position 0. It's also the value 0. This is at position 1, also the value 1. How annoying. But this is position 2, position 3, position 4. You might be thinking, well, why do we start counting from 0? Well, that is a convention that we use because the lowest value, if all of them were 0, was that all of them will be at position 0. Okay, so this in green is the index. So what do we use the index for? Well, let's say I want to get this particular value. Now before, when you try to access something, you call the name of the variable. So you call the name of the variable goals, and you'd have the value straight away. Because of course, a variable can only store one value. Now, when we call goals, we're like, well, which one do we want to look at? So what we have to do is we draw square brackets like this. And that indicates we're accessing an array, a one-dimensional array. We'll come back to that later. And I said I want to okay, let's pick another example. I want to pick this one here. I want to pick 2. I want to get this particular value. Well, I could put in 2 as in here, but 2 does not indicate the value. 2 indicates the index. So that would actually get me the value 3. So 2, the value put in here, is the index. If I want to access that value 2, do you see the index? It's at 6. Absolutely. So now in here, I'd want to put the value 6. that means then that this will access what's in here. For instance, let's say I wanted to change the value in there, then I'd say goals 6 is equal to 10. What would that do? Here's what it would do. It would take 10 and it will put it in this position here. Okay, let's have another look at our question. So, Elliot wants to count how many matches end with 0 goals. Complete the following pseudocode, so that's the pseudocode here, that's the code, for an algorithm to count up how many matches with 0 goals are scored. So it wants you to go through this array. Aha, there's a 0, that's 1, not a 0, not a 0, that's a 0, right? Until you count all the number of zeros. And this is an incomplete algorithm to allow us to do that. Okay, so we start with an original variable called no goals count, and that's a quite meaningful name. It means that the number of games where no goals have been scored. And of course, at the beginning, we set at 0 because we need to go through this array and see how many there are. We make use of a for loop. Now, if you remember, a for loop is when you know how many times you're going to go through a loop. Well, we're going to want to start here and then go here and here as we go along. Once we're past the array, we know its length. So we know how many times we want to go through and look to see what the values are as we go along. In fact, with arrays, invariably, you will be making use of for loops. We start at position 0. Why do we start at position 0? Because the first index is at 0. And we go to the lengths of goal. What is the length of goal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 10 in length. So why do we go from 0 to 10? Because you can see we don't. The last one is at position 9 because we start counting at 0. So that's why we take 1 off the goal's length. We start at 0 and we want to go up to the length of it, which is 10 minus 1, 9. Okay, great. And if you also remember, count will be our variable as we go through this. And count the first time around will be equal to 0. And then in a for loop, it will be 1, 2, 3, etc. Great. Well, as we're going along, what do we want to do? Well, we want to check, right? What's inside each of these parts of the array at that index? Is it a 0 or not? So if goals at what position? If it's goals at position 0, is that going to do what we want? Well, no, because it will go around and it will always check that first position there. We want to check to see if it's at position count, because count will be 0 and then it'll be 1. So is it 0? Oh, it is 0. Great. If it's at 1, nope. At 2, nope. At 3, yep, that's 0. So instead of goals being at 0, we want to put in count. So it's going along and it's checking to see if it's the value at that position at that index is 0. Okay, what happens if it is exactly equal to 0? Well, what do we do then? Well, we've got no goals count. What we want to do is increase that by 1, right? Because we found one. Don't be tempted to just say +1, by the way, because then unfortunately you won't be. You'll just be adding 1 to it. It needs to be no goals count equals no count plus 1, or no goals count plus equals 1. Either way would work. And then finally, what do we want to print at the end? Well, what variable are we using to keep track of the number of goals that have been scored? That's right, it's this no goals count. Great, I think that's the answer taken care of. Let's move on to the next one. Great, so we've looked at how arrays work. I'm not going to recap that. Now we're just going to look directly at the question. So the question says this. The following names of students are stored in an array with identifier student names. So student names, same square brackets. What's the only difference from the last question? Is that this time it's storing strings, while last time it was storing integers. And you can see that they're strings with speech marks, but still separated by commas. A school uses the array to call an attendance register every morning. Write an algorithm using iteration. By iteration, we're talking about for loops or while loops, so I have to think about which one we need to use. Display the name of each student one at a time, so we need to output it. Now, since it's an array, do you think we'll use a for loop or a while loop? For loop, completely agree with you. And at each stage,
So when we go through, so we start, first of all, we'll be with Rob, and then we'll have to ask them, is that student present or absent? So there have to be an input inside that for loop. And then we have to display the total number of present students and number of absent students. So we have to keep track of something, aren't we? So if we're looking in here, we've got taking as an input, whether the student is present or absent. So we have to ask the question, do we have to store that number of how many present and how many are absent? Yeah. If we're storing it, what we're going to have to store it in? Variable. So we need a variable for present, variable for absent, and it says we need a suitable message after all the students' names have been displayed. What will be a suitable message? This number were present, this many were absent. So what we're talking about, you're going to have to initialize, well, what should we initialize? The number of present and the number of absent. Before the loop, how many are present and how many are absent? 0. So present equals 0, absent equals 0. Then we'll step through the for loop. And if we're doing it in Python, it'll be something like for x in range, len, the len of what? Student names. Yeah? Well, the for loop it will do it automatically, yeah? And then you say print, or even be like status equals, we could ask them, equals input, open brackets, is student names at position X. I realize that saying this out loud. Are they present or not present? We'd have to take that in. And if they say it's present or not present, we'd have to use like an if statement. If status equals present, present plus plus. If student is absent, absent plus plus. Go through the whole for loop. And at the end, output the amount of present and absent. Okay, so I've just said it. I realize, but I just want you to like pause at this point and give it an attempt. And if you're miles off, you're miles off. But it's always a good idea to give it an attempt. So it's worth me saying I'm choosing to answer this in Python syntax. However, this is not necessary for a question like this. If it just says answer in pseudocode, you don't have to follow exact syntax. It's only in part B of paper 2. And it will say, and you'll know if you need to do it because it will say answer it in a high-level language or an OCR exam reference language. So I kicked off by initializing present to 0 and absent to 0. And then the next thing I'm going to use is a for loop. Why do I choose to use a for loop? Because I know how many times this is going to go around. So the syntax will be for, and then I declare the variable I'm using to count with. I'm going to say that's, I don't know, I. And then in Python, the command is in range. And if you remember, there's brackets. And inside the brackets, you specify how many times it's going to go around. If I put in 10, it'll go from 0 to 9. However, in this way, I actually know. So it's actually 6. I could put 6 in, and that would work. But that's only if I happen to have 6 students. It's much better to use the command here, the length of the array. So if I put len and I put the name of the array, what's the array name? Student names. Then it will find the length of student names. In this case, it's 6. But if it changes, then it will change for that. So this is going to find 6. So I will be 0, then I will be 1, I will be 2, until 5. Do you know what I have to do at the end of the for? Colon. That's exactly right. I need to put a colon at the end. Brilliant. Hey, question. When I do my next code, do I put it directly underneath or do I indent it? Absolutely, I indent it. Now, that's good for maintainability, but in this context, if it's Python, it's also necessary to show scope. Otherwise, it won't work. Then let's have a little think. What's the next thing you need to do? You need to display the name of each student. So you could do that in a separate line. You could print the name of the student. So the command could be print. How do I print the name of each student? That's what I need you to think about for a second. So I want to access the array, which is student names. And then because it's an array, I access it by using square brackets. And in here, I put the number, the index I want to access. So if I put, for instance, if I put 3, that will mean that it will always return the third one. Now, you might think that's Hugh, but it's not Hugh. Which is the third one? It is Emma, because Rob's at 0, Anna's at 1, Hugh's at 2, and Emma is at 3. But it will always do Emma. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. I want it to first time around do to say Rob, then Anna, then Hugh, then Emma. So one more every time. This variable here, I, this first time it will be 0, then it will be 1, then it will be 2. So I want to put I into that box there. Right, so this is just going to say the person's name. That's all it's going to say. So what do I need to take in? Let's think about it. What do I need to take in about that person? What do I need to take in? Or if they're absent or not. So we could say something like status, and then equals input, enter P or A, something like that. And that will mean is that it will say, for instance, it will say Hugh, and then you'd either type in P or A. Does that make sense? Do I need to convert that to an integer or anything? No, I can take that into a string, can't I? So I'm going to introduce a new variable called status, and then I'm going to want to invite my end user to input either P or A. P for present, A for absent. Yeah? So what's the command to take data in? Input. Spot on. So input. And then in here, I can put the message. So I could say something like enter P or A. So it's going to say Hugh. No, it's going to say Rob. Enter P or A. What should I do if they enter P or A? Store it, right. So I want to increase present by 1 if they say P. I want to increase absent by 1 if they say A. So how do I do that then? What am I going to use to allow me to do that? So the person types in P. I want present to go up by 1. How do I do that? How am I going to do that? If statement. Totally agree with you. So if what? If what? Well, not input, because I've just stored that in something. Yeah. If status, I'm going to make a mistake. You tell me what mistake I've made. Oh, the indent right now is okay. Two mistakes. What are the two mistakes? Double equals. Thank you, Victor. Single equals assignment. Double equals comparison. Second mistake. You have to put the speech marks around the P because it's a string. Colon. Colon at the end. Yes? I think brackets mean the same sort of thing. I could put brackets here and here. Strictly, it's not necessary, though. It would still work anyway. Some programming languages, you have to put the brackets. But the colon, I guess, fulfills that function here. All right, what do I do? If it is P, what do I do? Present equals present plus 1. Question again, do I do it here or do I do it here? 1 or 2? 2. So it's inside the if statement. So this command here says present plus equals will basically mean present equals present plus 1. All right, anything else I need to do? Yeah. So I could do another if, or I could do elif maybe. Or I can do else. Although else could be like potentially if they put the wrong thing in, maybe. Just so you know, you could do an if status equals A, totally fine. You could do an elif status equals A, totally fine. Potentially you could do an else. Because in theory, you only should be putting in P and A. In general, I wouldn't recommend it, because what happens if the person... If I put lowercase p, is it going to work? No. So in general, there should be a else be like, oh, we don't recognize that input. But I'm not going to be that extra. I'm just going to do another if statement. Can you do another if statement for the A and make it happen? Spot on. Thank you so much. So that's the first line done successfully. Underneath it, directly underneath, 1 or 2? 2, absolutely indented inside. What do I do next? Yeah, you're right. You're completely right. Absent. Do you want to do the plus equals, the shorthand again? All right, kid. Okay. Plus equals what? 1. Is there anything else I need to do inside the for loop? Please, Josh. So the very last thing we need to do is to display the number present and absent. Should we do that inside the for loop? I don't think so, because that means every time the for loop goes around, it will update it again. I think we should do it outside. How do we do it outside the for loop? By putting it back here. Absolutely, by putting it back here. So we could say print, and then we could something like total present plus. Hey, do you know if can I just stick present on the end as a variable? Technically I can't because it's an int, so I have to cast it to a string and then inside it present. Can you see how you would do absent? Can you see how you could do absent? Same deal, isn't it? You do the same one underneath, but for absent. And it's finished.
Okay, great. We're on the final question we'll do on one-dimensional arrays. These arrays that are in a single list. Later on, we will be looking at two-dimensional arrays. But let's see if we've taken in all the learning we need to take in here. Let's read the question. A memory game is played where 3 players, A, B, and C, have to choose a number between 0 and 100. So 0 and 100, I'm thinking an array of 101 spots. If the number has already been chosen, a message is displayed that says taken. Okay, so you ask the person to pick a number between 0 and 100. If there's something in that spot, it says it's taken. Okay, but if it hasn't been taken or hasn't been chosen, the spelling mistake there, letter is placed next to it. Okay, so the next one along. So, okay, well, we've got an example here. So this is 0 to 100 with some in between. If the person picks 4, it says, aha, that's taken. But the player's letter is placed next to it. So if it has been taken, you put it in. So in this case, it says it's taken. In this case, it says, aha, you can put it here. By next to it, it means, I think, in the slot here. And you can imagine this is still a one-dimensional array, because this would be the index, which is part of the arrays we discussed earlier. The quantity of numbers that have not yet been chosen is displayed. Okay, so we have to check how many places are free. So we'll have to use probably some kind of for loop, step through this. Is this free? No. Is this free? No. Is this free? No. Is this free? Yes. And probably free in this context would be like speech marks to indicate blank, because it's going to be strings. Okay, the winner is the player who has chosen the most unique numbers by the end of the game. The numbers are stored in the array numbers. I think that should be square brackets, personally. A number that has not yet been chosen is stored as an empty string. Okay, we've been told. So that is represented by an empty string. And at a later point, you want to check if it's empty. You're going to say if the space equals speech mark. Great. You've been asked to program part of the game. Okay. Write an algorithm for player A's turn. So we're only concerned with player A. Take as an input the number the player A has chosen. So by that, the number. So the first thing we need to do is a variable. Take it in. Remember, I write this all in Python. So I'm going to take that in as an integer. In pseudocode, you don't actually have to worry about data type. You could just take it as a variable. If it has not already been chosen, so we'd have to access the array at that position and say we would have to use an if statement. If it is equal to blank, then you can put something there. But if it's not equal to blank, then you'd have to output taken. Then count and output the quantity of numbers left that have not been chosen. And then we'll have to do some kind of for loop afterwards to check how many is going to be taken or how many is still free. Okay, great. Well, do you want to have a pause now? See if you can answer it yourself. I'll start answering it in a moment. And of course, if you're not sure how to start, you can see me start it. If that sort of jigs your memory, then you can go from there. Okay, great. So I'm going to do this. They've broken it down for us. Takes an input, the number that player A chooses. So I'm going to do that as the first one. We'll do a variable. We'll do an int input, ask them to pick a number. So I'll initialize a variable called number, and then I'll take in an input. Like I say, I'll be doing it in Python, so I'll need to cast it as an int. Now the person's pick a number will have to check whether it's free or not free. So this will involve the skills of using selection, using an if-else statement, and also be able to access an array. An if statement, and we're saying if what? Well, if we have to look at the array. What is the name of the array? It's called numbers. Of course, that will look at the entire array. We want to look at one point in it, so we need to do square brackets to find that, to access a particular index. If we put in 0 here, it will access position 0, but we don't want to access position 0. Well, maybe we do. We want to access the position at number. Great. So we're accessing that position. Okay, what we're looking for? Well, we're looking to see if it's equal to, it depends. We want to see if it's equal to A, or we can say it's equal to blank. I'm going to say it's equal to blank. Why not? So it's equal to speech mark. So that indicates it's blank. Okay, if it's blank, well, that means that we're able to place our piece. Now, what piece are we going to put in? We need to put in an A in speech marks. At what position? A position number or index number in numbers. So let's do that. Again, we're going to access the array. Again, we're going to do the square brackets, and then we're going to point the index where it's going to be writing number. However, this time we're going to assign it a value, so single equals speech marks, and then we're player A, so we're going to put an A in that spot. Okay, well, what's the alternative? Remember, the else is in line with the if. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is that there is something else there, so maybe that's an A or a B or a C. What do we do in that context? Well, it tells us that we have to say it's taken. Oops, I made a slight mistake. At the end of the else statement, to be correct in Python, we'll need to put the colon there. And yes, the print, again, indented for taken. Okay, now we'll come back here for whatever we're doing next. We'll do the final bullet point, and if you see what it says counts and outputs the quantity of numbers left. So the numbers that are still blank. Now, to be able to do that, we're going to have to step through the entire array, and we'll use iteration. And of course, because we know the length of the array, we'll be using a for loop. So I'm declaring a for loop. I use x as my counter, and remember it's Python, so I'll say in range. Now, actually, it's up to you. You could put just 101 because that'll go from 0 to 100. Or, and I think I'll keep doing this, is I'm going to use the length of the array to get us that number, because then it will be dynamically changeable. So find the len of what? The len of the array, which is called numbers, which we put inside these brackets, and it will return 101, and therefore it will allow us to go from 0 to 100. Okay, let's take a moment to think. What do I need to do? Well, as I'm going through the array, I'll be stepping through each item. What will I want to do at each item? I want to see whether it's going to be a 0 or not. Okay, not a 0, blank or not. So I'll have to have a new variable I need to use to allow me to keep track of it. Now, if I declare it in here and say something like, it says the number that have not been chosen, so free or something. If I put free equals 0 here, if I put it inside the for loop, it will keep resetting to it. So I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to declare a new variable called free, and I'll initialize it to the value of 0. Remember, again, the reason I don't want to put it inside the for loop is that means that it will keep resetting to free every time otherwise. And as I go through, I want to say that the number free is going to increase by 1 every time. Okay, great. So I need another if statement indented inside. And then what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for, same as last time, we're accessing numbers, the numbers array. Now before, in the square brackets, we always put number, didn't we? But that's only going to check the one spot that the person's picked. We want to go through the entire array. Remember, what we want to use is this counter x, because x will start at 0, and then when it goes around, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, right to the end. So inside here, we're going to want to put x. There we go. What are we checking for? Well, as we're going through here, we're going to check to see whether it's going to be equals, so comparison. We're checking to see if it's free. And it's free if it's just 2 speech marks like that. If it is free, what should we do? Well, we should increase the count of free by 1 every single time. So let's do that. Before, I've made use of plus equals, but just in case that throws some people, we can say free is equal to free plus 1, so that we're increasing the number of frees by 1 every time we see a spot that's empty. So this will keep going around. It's going to count them all out. Do we need to do the else? Well, if it's not free, what do we do? Nothing. So in this case, we don't even need to do the else. So it's just the if. The for loop will go through and count them all. And at the end, it says that we needed to output that. So I'm going to put the print. If you put it here, it will only happen if we do the if statement. If you do it here, it will print every single time the for loop goes around. I want to do it here, so it's outside the scope of the for loop. So I'm going to do print. What's the message I want to say? Well, you could say something like, there are this many free spaces. So I'll do, there are plus, and this is where I'll have to cast it back to a string, otherwise it won't work. Again, if you were doing this in sudo, you wouldn't have to do this. This is just because we're doing this, trying to do this in Python. Plus what? There are this many, and that will say the number free. There are this many free. Brilliant. Okay, fresh topic now. Functions and procedures, otherwise known as subprograms, otherwise known as subroutines. What are these things? Well, this is something that can really trip people over. So I'm definitely going to take a few minutes now to give you the overview again about what they are. What they are ways of really adding complexity and power to the way that you program. But how do they work? Why is it people struggle to understand them so much? Well, guess what? This whole time you've been using functions. You've been using subprograms. For instance, let's write out a certain command. This is something that you would have learned to have done a long time ago. You have a variable name. You call input. You put equals rather. You put input. And then in between brackets, you put what is your name. Input, that's a subprogram. In fact, it's what you call a function. How does it work? Well, imagine functions are when you're trying to package up a whole bunch of code that somebody's already written, maybe yourself. So this is all my code, all packaged up, how to do it. And we have to give it a name. In this case, we're giving it the name of input. So every time we want to run this bit of code, we say input, and then it runs that code for us. Neat. Okay, well, what about these brackets? Well, sometimes there are just brackets like that and nothing inside it. Well, how come? Well, in that case, you're saying, I just need you to run this code exactly the same as it's always been stored. But sometimes, like this time, we have to put something inside those brackets. What we call that is a parameter value. Parameter value, sometimes referred to as an argument. In this case, we've sent this whole thing, what is your name? Okay, well, what's going to happen? Why do we have to send it? Well, that is actually going to get put into the code someplace because we've just sent it. We called input, so we've got these lines of code, but also we're going to send it this. So this needs to go in here. Now when we run it, what's going to happen, and if you remember what happens with this, it's going to print what's inside this bracket. So then you're going to see that be printed. Neat. Of course, it doesn't just get called, it also, in this case, returns a value. So we call it, and then it sends a value back. It what's called returns a value. Just so you know, a function is a subroutine, a subprogram like this, that returns a value. And we sent it back, and then it stored it in name. So let's recap. Subprograms are when you take bits of code and you package together like this, and you call them, you give it a certain name or an identifier. In this case, the code for how to do input is being packaged together, and we labeled it input. Also, when you call it, you have to send these brackets. Sometimes you put values inside. In this case, we put the value, what is your name? And that's called a parameter value. How does it get used? Well, that gets put inside the code. Now, if you think how the input works, that means it will print this bit to you so that the end user will get to see the message. If you did print without anything in it, it just shows up blank because you haven't sent it a value to do. You could send a bunch of values, you could send multiple values, and we'll be looking at that later. And then it returns, if it's a function, the value back to name. Sometimes it doesn't return anything. Let's give another example. I'm going to create a new subroutine, and we'll see if we'll get the idea. Okay, imagine this example. Somebody's driving along, and they want to know whether they have enough petrol or diesel in their car to get to the destination. So how would we know whether we have enough to be able to go to our destination? Well, let's think about what kind of inputs we'd need to put in. So what input? By inputs, I mean what data can you abstract out that would be crucial to make these calculations? Have a quick think, and let's see if we agree with each other. Well, first of all, I'm thinking distance to go. What else? Well, I guess how much petrol I have or diesel I have left. So I guess we need that, but we'll also need to know how many miles you go per gallon. If you're in another country, you do kilometers per liter. I don't know what to tell you. We're stuck in the past. It's also worth specifying for distance, this will have to be in miles. So those are the data points I want to input. Okay, so those are my inputs. And then we'll have to think about the code. And let's have a quick think about what are we going to have to return. I guess in this case, what we return is whether you can make the journey or not. So maybe a Boolean true false. Okay, great. So to clarify, this will be our subprogram. We'll have to send it the inputs of distance, miles per gallon, and gallons of fuel. It will look at all that information, process it, and then finally output whether you can make the journey or not. And in terms of code, let's do that super quick. So how do we do that in terms of code? Well, that's quite straightforward. The first thing we do in Python is you write the word def. Def just stands for define. As in, we're defining the subroutine. And then we give the name of the subroutine. So maybe, I don't know, something like make journey. I've shortened it just to make it. And then we think about the three inputs. So what are the three things we're sending it? Well, we're sending it distance. Between each of these, we'll need a comma. Then we're saying it's miles per gallon. And then finally, we need to say the gallons, right? The amount of G's, the amount of gallons we actually have, okay? So that's how you would define the top line. Just like with an if statement, for loop, while loop, you end with a colon, and then think about it, about the indenting. You have to indent inside for maintainability to show scope, but otherwise also it won't work in Python. I think the first thing we should do is calculate how many miles we can do. So how can we calculate how many miles we can do with our current tag? So I have my new variable called can do. And if you think about it, if you times the amount of miles per gallon you can do by the amount of gallons you have, then you'll get the amount you can do in miles in this context. And then how do we know if we can make it? Well, we can say in here if, you can absolutely put inside a subroutine, other functions, iterations, whatever code you like. So let's think about what we need to check. We've been sent as a parameter the distance you need to travel. And we've just found out how many miles we can do. So if you think about it, if you take dist here, so you've basically taken this parameter here and used it like a variable. If that's less than what you can do, well, guess what? That means that you can actually make that distance, right? So we said we'd return a Boolean. So I think inside here, nested on that side here, we can say return. Just so you know, that means that as soon as that return line is reached, the entire subroutine closes and then the true is outputted. So it won't go any further. So what else? Well, if it's the case that can do is more than the distance, is less than the distance you can do, well, of course, that means you're not going to be able to make it. So we've got the other return statement in here, which will be false. You do not have enough petrol or diesel left for the journey. And again, as soon as it gets here, it would finish. And that's how the code would look. So to recap, when you're writing a subroutine, think about the inputs that you'll need to send it. What parameters will it need to receive? Sometimes it doesn't have to receive any. Sometimes it might have to receive quite a few. Also think about what do you need to output. Do you need to return a value? Or sometimes you don't have to return a value, and that's called a procedure. And so here, that is a rough go at how you can actually write your own subroutine. Okay, that was a quick run through about how subroutines work. Now here's our opportunity to read through the question. Let's go. So in this case, the teacher asks students how long they spend completing homework. Students answer in minutes and hours. For example, they may say 2 hours and 50 minutes. The teacher would like to create an algorithm that will display the students' inputs in minutes only. So it's going to take in, think about it, what were the inputs, the number of hours, and the number of minutes. Have a think, what's the output going to be? That's right, it will be the number of minutes. So for the inputs, we have to take in both the minutes and we'll have to take in the hours. Once we've taken in the number of minutes and hours, a calculation will be done and then the output will be the number of minutes. Great, let's read on. A program is created to convert hours and minutes into a total number of minutes. The teacher wants to create a subprogram to perform the calculation. So this is about writing that subroutine. We know our inputs. It's going to take in the number of hours and the number of minutes as two parameter values, and it's going to need to return the number of minutes. The program has been started, but is not complete. Complete the design for the program. Okay, great. So here we've got hours. We've allowed the person to be able to input the number of hours and to input the number of minutes. Final total is where we're going to call the function and send it the hours and minutes. And here is where we're going to write the code, the subroutine, to be able to solve that problem. Brilliant. Okay, well, let's get to work. First thing we want to do maybe is here, let's do the function. So remember, we need an identifier. So this is the bit that would say def in Python. And the next thing will be the name of it. So maybe, I don't know, calc minutes or calc mins. Great. Now, remember, you then open bracket and close bracket. This is if it's not been sent any parameters or any inputs, but we know that's not the case. We have to send it the number of hours and minutes. So let's do that super quick. I put hours and mins, and you may be wondering why I haven't written it exactly as it was before as hours and minutes. Well, actually, it's a good idea to have parameter values having slightly different identifier names. Okay, so how do we calculate the total number of minutes? So in here, we now need to do the function where we're going to have the total mins. How do we calculate that? Well, it's going to be hours times by 60, hours times by 60 plus mins. I.e., if we have been sent 2 hours and 10 minutes, it will be 2 times 60, so 120, plus 10, 130. And remember, now we want to output it. To output it, we have to use the command return. Now, what are we returning? Well, we're going to return this variable here, total mins. Great. That's our subprogram taken care of, or our function in this case. When we get to final total, we then need to be able to generate this thing. So first of all, we need to access our function. How do we access it? How do we how do we access it and send it the values? Well, we get it by calling it. And how do we call it? We call it by its name. So we call calcmins, then we open brackets, and for instance, I could send it 4, 6. What would that do? Well, that means that 4 would be hours, and 6 would be minutes. 4 times by 60, 240, plus 6, 246. Return total mins, 246 would be the final total. But remember, we're not just sending it the 4 and the 6. We're also going to have a go at doing, we're going to have to send it rather the hours and mins. So this time we'll send it the hours and minutes we just taken in as inputs. So in this case, hours was taken in here with the inputs, minutes was taken in here with the inputs, then it was sent to the subroutine that you call by its name. Hours matches up with the first parameter value here. Minutes becomes mins. So let's say if you put in 10 hours and 20 minutes, then that 10 will be stored in here, sent in here, and 10 times 60, 600, and same with the minutes. Then the value is calculated and returned. When it's sent back, it is then stored in final total, just like input allowed the value to be returned here. Great stuff. Great. Now we've done our recap, let's focus on answering some of these questions. It kicks off with a nice sort of recap question when it's looking about arrays. Let's read the question together. Heath is researching how long to the nearest minute each student in his class spends playing computer games. In 1 week, which includes Monday to Friday, he is storing the data in a 2D array. So that stands for two-dimensional array. We'll go into this a bit later, but this is a great opportunity since we're looking at it. All the arrays we've been looking at so far are one-dimensional because they're a list in sort of one line, you can imagine. A two-dimensional array looks like this. It's a table. It goes in literally 2 dimensions. And we'll look how to access it later. For now, let's keep reading the question. Figure 2 shows part of the array with 4 students. So student 0, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, depends how you want to use it. And then the days of the week, 0 being Monday, Tuesday being 1, 2 being Wednesday, 3 being Thursday, and 4 being Friday. For example, student 1 on Monday, which is day 0, played 30 minutes of computer games. Brilliant. So 1, 0, 30 minutes. Hey, explain why Heath is using an array to store the data. So do you remember why we used arrays? What was the alternative? If we didn't have arrays, what would we have to make use of? That's right. Otherwise, we would have to make use of multiple variables. Okay, great. Well, but what was the advantage then of using the array? Well, it allowed more than one piece of data, remember a variable can only store one thing, to be stored under a single identifier. Great. What else are we looking at? We're looking at an identity type that will be used to store the number of minutes in the array. Number of minutes. So these are the ones here, 60, 30, 60, 0, 45. Let's think about data types for a moment. A string would be numbers and letters. Well, that doesn't seem appropriate for this. We're looking at numbers. Numbers, we could either be making use of integers or real or float numbers. Remember, integers are whole numbers, whereas float is a number, float or real are numbers with decimal places. I don't see any decimal places. All the numbers would appear to be in whole numbers, therefore we'll make use of integer. State why this data type is the most appropriate. I would say we've just answered that. All the minutes are in whole numbers. i.e. none of the numbers made use of decimal places. On to the next one. Now this question builds onto each level, so it'll be a continuation. Okay, we need to continue making use of this two-dimensional array. So let's do a little bit more learning about how two-dimensional arrays work. Now, we remember on a one-dimensional array, so let's say we just had this top line here. Let's maybe do this super quick. So imagine it was just this line. That we could say that's a one-dimensional array with an index of 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. Well, of course, now that we have multiple lines, we're looking at having to keep track of not just an index of this way going across, but also going down. That's the big deal with a two-dimensional array. So it's like a table, but if I want to find, say, it's this 60, how do I find it? Well, I can say it's 3 and 1, or 3, 1. What about this one? We can say it's 1, 2. Now, the only thing that might trip you up is it 2, 1 or 1, 2, right? Which way around? Luckily, in all of these questions I've seen, they always give you an example to help you get started, and we'll have a look at that right now. So, in this question, we'll have a quick read through it. It says that we read the first bit before, but it says, for example, student 1, so this student, on Monday, remember that's 0, plays 30 minutes. Okay. Heath wants to output the number of minutes student 3, so this student, plays on a Wednesday, 2. So the question was, is it 3, 2 or 2, 3, right, to access that 15? Well, here it's 3, so the student, that one comes first, then the day. And see, they've given it to you here, and they said the output is 20. So the first value is the student, comma, the day of the week. And also, if you see, it's square bracket, first value, first index, comma, second index, square brackets. Great. It's now asking us to take in that information to make this, to answer this question. Write the code to output the number of minutes student 0 played on a Wednesday. The number of minutes is played by student 0 on a Wednesday. So if you remember, we knew that student comes first, and then it's the day. So student 0, and then the day is Wednesday. So it will be 0, 2. And so we can use the same kind of stuff we had before. We can say print, just like we saw in the example. Then we open up a bracket. We call the array. The array is hours played, so that's the name of it. Then we do a square bracket, just like we did with a one-dimensional array, but now we need to give it the 2 bits of data. So the first bit of data, as we saw here, was the student. So this time it's student 0. So we put down the value 0, and then comma for the second index, and it says on a Wednesday, day 2, and we can see that that still be 2 here, so it would be 0, 2. And that would allow us to access the data from that person. In fact, if we just have a quick look now, which will it be? So it would be student 0, day 2, it would print out 200 minutes. Then it says, state the output if Heath runs the code, print, it's asking us to do this, 2. So 2 is the student, so it's this column on day 1, so this day. So 2 and 1, we're looking for the value 0. Great. Let's look at the next question. State the output if Heath runs the code, hours played, so print, but hours played 3, so student 3, comma 1. So 3, 1, that would be 60. I'm going to make a quick note of that here, so 60. And what's the other one? 3, 2, so 3, 2 would be 20. So what we've got here is 60 plus 20, so the answer would be 80. So what OCR has done for you just then is it's kind of, if you're not too sure about the indexes of a two-dimensional array, it's giving you a couple of questions to warm up to allow you to get comfortable with it. And now in here, it says write an algorithm to output the total number of minutes student 0 played playing computer games from Monday to Friday. So before maybe we'd have student 0 in a one-dimensional array, Now it's in a 2D array, and we need to print out this, and then this, and then this, and then this. So we're going to make use of iteration. We know how many times we want it to go around, 4 times, so that's a for loop we'll make use of. And as we go around, what we're going to do is have a total, initialize it as 0 before the for loop, and every single time it will be total equals total plus hours played, square brackets, the student, which is 0, comma, and then whatever using as our counter, so X or whatever we like. Why don't you pause me now and give it a good try? If you're not too sure, you can unpause me and get you started. So I'm going to start off initializing total to a value of 0. Remember, I'm going to write this in Python. So I'm going to do the for, and then I'll do the Python way of doing it. So I need a counter. Maybe I'll call that X, and then in range. How many times do I want it to go around? Have a think about it. I need it to go around 4 times. Great. And then colon at the end. And as I go around, I'm going to have to out the total. So have a think about how you'd write that. Okay, great. What are we going to add to the total? We have to call the array. What is the name of the array? Hours played. And then to get to a particular index in an array, what do we use? Square brackets. But this time we can't just send 1. We have to send the 2 indices because it's a 2-dimensional array. Now, all of the different things we're looking at, we're always looking at student 0. And you remember the first value you send is for the student, so we'll send it 0, and then comma, and then we need to say the day of the week. And that'll be X, right? Because X will be 0, and then 1, and 2, and 3, and then 4. Oh, I've made a boo-boo here. My bad. What's that going to do? It's going to say 0, 1, 2, 3. That is a big mistake from me right there. There you go. We all do them. What should it be? It should be 5. So it would be 0, comma, X in square brackets. When this for loop ends, total will have the total amount, and then finally it says to output it. There we go. Remember, don't put the print inside the for loop because it will just print it every single time. You put it here, and then it'll be printed at the end. Okay, we're going back to having a look at functions and procedures here. Let's have a quick read of the question, and then let's think about how we might answer it. Heath has the day of the week stored as a number. So 0 equals Monday, 1 equals Tuesday, etc. Okay. Write a subprogram that takes the number as a parameter, so the 0, 1, 2, etc., and then returns the day of the week as a string. So remember, when we were thinking previously about subroutines, we need to think about the input. So the input in this time is the number, and then the output is going to be the day as a string. And then we have to write the code to make it all happen. Great. Let's have a go at doing it. Again, I'll do as I've done before, and I'll be writing it in Python code. Okay, so in Python, the first thing to kick us off will be the word def to define a subroutine. Then we need the name of our subroutine. So I don't know, maybe like convert day or something, or num today. It should be meaningful, just like variable names should be meaningful. Then do you remember it's brackets. Now, how many inputs do we have? That's right. We only really have 1 right now. We just have the number that we're being sent. So shall we just say num? And then we have to return, and depends on the number we have, but we have to return the day appropriate for it. Now, there's 2 ways that strike me you could answer this question. The first one could be, and this is what I personally would do, is declare an array, days equals square brackets, and then all the names of the days in a 1-dimensional array, and use num and return num at that position. Okay? Admittedly, that might be trickier for some students. So the alternative could be something like, if num equals 0, return Monday. elif num equals 1, return Tuesday. elif num equals 2, return Wednesday. elif, you see what I mean? I hate doing stuff like that. So I'm going to show you how to do it with an array, and hopefully you understand my description of the other way around. So I'm just going to declare an array. I'm going to call it days, and then inside there I'm going to put in all the names of the days. Bear with me. Great. So I've got a one-dimensional array. Monday's in position 0, Tuesday 1, Wednesday 2, Thursday 3, Friday 4. And actually now it would be a piece of cake, because all I need to do is return days, square bracket, num. So you can see the way it works. You'll be sent 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. You then look over here as to which day it's going to be. If it's 1, it will return Tuesday. If it's 3, then when days, it will go days at position 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, it will return Thursday. Again, if you found that confusing, you can also write the whole thing out with either a switch statement or a if num equals 0, return Monday, elif num equals 1, return Tuesday, elif num equals 2, return Wednesday, etc. Either way would work. I can't say I like that as a solution though. Let's have a look at this question. Continuation of the students and days of the week two-dimensional array questions. Heath needs to work out the average number of minutes spent playing computer games each day for the class, which contains 30 students. So instead of being 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it will go all the way up to 29, 0 to 29. Write an algorithm to output the average number of minutes the whole class spends playing computer games each day. So before, we were looking across a single student, and now, so we're looking, 0 going all the way down as a list. Now we need to do that for this student, and then this student, and then this student, and of course also calculate an average as we go along. The way you answer this kind of question, instead of just using one loop that goes down like this, you need to have one loop that goes this way, and then another loop that says, okay, now do this one. Now do the next loop. Now do the next loop. You need to do a for loop inside another for loop, or otherwise known as nested inside the for loop. So what we need to do is have a first for loop that's going to go and look through all 29 students. So to do that, we're going to use a for loop. And again, I'm going to write it in Python. Okay, great. This first for loop is going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 29. What do we want to do when we get in there? Well, we want to, when we get on this one, is go 0, great, and then count days of the week, add them all up, and get a total. So the first thing we should do, I think, is set total to 0. Now when you go to each student, the total will be reset to 0. Okay. Now what you could do is something like total equals, what's the name of the array again? Hours played, and it could be x, 0 plus hours played x, 1 plus hours played x, 2 plus hours played x, 3, and finally plus hours played x, 4. Now that would actually work, but it's not very efficient. You see it was x, 0, x, 1, x, 2, x, 3. We should use a loop for that one, and that is the nested loop I was referring to earlier. Let's show you what it would look like. So I'll do another for loop, and this time I'll say for y in range, but I'm going through the days of the week, so I need to go 5 times. Do you know, also, I'm looking at this now, I was going to get an average for each student, but looking at here, it says write an algorithm to output the average number of minutes the whole class spends. Oh, so you know what? If I put this total equals 0 and I add to the total, it's going to be a problem. Let me do it and show you why it'll be a problem, or you tell me. So I go total in here equals total plus, now we need to get the data from the array. What was the name of the array again? That's right, it's hours played. Then we got square brackets, some value, comma, some other value, square brackets. What do we put here and here? Remember, the first value was the student number. The second value is the day of the week. Have a little think. See if it comes to you. X is keeping track of the student. So X will be 0, then Y will be 0, Y will be 1, Y will be 2, Y will be 3, Y will be 4, and then X will be 1, Y will be 0. So the first one, the X, that's keeping track of the individual student. What's keeping track of the day of the week? Y is. The way I've currently got it configured, though, is that when this finishes and X goes up to 1 or 2, total resets to 0. Actually, I've misread it. I've just realized. And I thought it was asking for the average for every student. So actually, I want to move this total. Where do I want to move it? The resetting of it. That's right. I want to put it right at the beginning so that it's initialized as being 0. And then every single time this loop's going around, it's just constantly adding to the total. Once this has finally got to 29, and it does 29, 0, 29, 1, 29, 2, 29, 3, 29, 4, that will be finished. That will go to 30, and that will finish. And then total will have added up every single one. So now we need to do the average. How are we going to calculate the average once the whole loops have finished? How are we going to do it? Well, we need the total, right? And then divided by what? We could divide by 30, but that's just the total number of students. What we're trying to say is the total minutes they do on average each day. So it will be divided by 30, the number of days, the number of students, times by the number of days. And that will get you all the sessions, get you your average. And then finally, we're going to output that average. So what new skill, what new thing did we kind of look at or recover? We looked at how we deal with a two-dimensional array when you want to step through all the values and check for something. This is what you do. You have nested for loops. One loop is going this way, and the other loop is going this way. So essentially what happens, a bit like a typewriter or something, that's maybe not a great reference, it's 0 for the first loop, and then in this loop will keep going around. So it'll be 0, it'll be this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. That loop's finished, comes back over here, so this is up to 1. Then this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, goes over here, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and on until the end. Great stuff. Okay, we're now looking at core definitions of subprograms, of subroutines. Remember I said there were two types, functions and procedures. First of all, it's asking you to identify what the differences are, and then a couple of examples of the benefits. So, functions and procedures are both examples of subprograms. Describe one difference between a function and a procedure, and then we've got all this space here. What was the one difference I just said? That's right. A function returns a value, whereas a procedure does not return a value. Simple as that, really. Great. Now we're on to the other side, And it's asking us to identify two benefits of using subprograms. There's a lot we can talk about here, but I'm going to try and keep it simple and not go through all the different examples. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that might be easiest to remember. Now, we know some of the core principles of computational thinking is decomposition and abstraction. Decomposition, if you remember, is when we break down a big idea into a bunch of smaller ideas. Subprograms work wonderfully with this, because then when you have the smaller idea, you can write them individually as a subroutine. So I'll go for that as our first answer. So I'm saying it works well with decomposition, allowing you to create subprograms for the decomposed problems. Okay, but what else? It allows you to make use of reuse code, so code that maybe you've written before and want to use again, or indeed somebody else has. So that's going to make it quicker to develop, because you can also use libraries written by other people. I would also say it's easier to test, because you're not testing all the code, you're testing sections of the code. And because of that, it's easier to maintain, because then you can spot the code easier if there's a problem. Plus, you can work on isolated bits of code. And guess what? You could pass that to other people in a team. So you could have multiple members of a team work on different subroutines. And they might bring to bear different specialities, so you could focus on what they're good at. You could say a lot more than this as well. That would be easily 4 marks. Just want to give you a few things to be thinking about. Okay, we're coming back to another two-dimensional array question. As mentioned before, what can be tricky is figuring out for the index which way around we're supposed to be writing it. But as I mentioned to you, they'll nearly always give you an example, as they've done here, to tell you which way around to write it. Okay, why don't we have a go at trying to read this question and answer the first part of it. Data for 1 week, Monday to Friday, see a theme here, is stored in a two-dimensional array with the identifier mins played. This is very similar to our other problem, is it not? The following table shows part of this array containing 4 students. So we've got our students going this way, and then days a week going this way. And this is the number of minutes played doing computer games. Okay, great. So Stuart's done this, Wes has done this, Victoria's done this, Dan, etc. Okay. The teacher wants to output the number of minutes Dan played computer games on a Wednesday. So Dan is column 3, Wednesday column 2, so it's 20. So the question is, if we want to find that 20, is it 3, 2 or 2, 3? And it tells you right here it's 3, 2. So that lets us know. In fact, you could even write that down on your paper. It would make sense to me. You could write on your paper which one is which. So I'm saying students is this one, days is this one. Nice little reminder for me for the future. Okay, write the program code to output the number of minutes that Stuart played computer games on Friday. So Stuart, so that's 0. Friday, that's 4. 0, 4. We need to write it down here, and it says we must use OCR exam reference language or a high-level programming language. Now, we've been writing everything in Python. So can you have a go at trying to put the answer here? Give me a pause. So it's print, comma, mins played, because that's the name of the subroutine, the array, square bracket. Now it's students first, so the student was Stuart. Do you remember which one Stuart was? That's right, that's 0, comma, the day. So that was on a Friday. So which day is Friday? Have a quick look. That's 4. Close square brackets, close brackets. Oh, FYI, I should have said this a long time ago. The color coding, that's just to help your readability. You should not be doing this in the exam. Just write it. I just do, arrays and variables green, values red, functions blue, or try to. Okay, let's continue. The next one here is asking us about rewriting an algorithm. The teacher writes a program to add up and print out the total number of minutes students 2 played, so 1 student, on over 5 days, Monday to Friday. So they initialize a variable being 0, and then they add, oh, hey, here we go. So this is quite inefficient, isn't it? It's adding over here the minutes played for 2 and then 0, and then adding it to 2 and this one and then this one and this one. So you see the 2 stays the same, but it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, what would you make use of to count out that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? Right, it's repeating, so it's using iteration, 2 types of iteration, for loops and while loops. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. What does that seem like to you? To me, that's a for loop. Okay, so let's have a go at writing this out. So the first thing we want to do is initialize the total, then write a for loop. Think how many times that's to go around. And remember, you have to write it in Python. It's not optional, or OCR exam reference language, or whatever language you're having to learn. And at the end, print it. Okay, give me a pause, give it an attempt, and then we'll do it. Okay, so I'm going to start with putting a total here. So the total is going to be initialized to be 0, right? And then after that, we'll have to have a think how we're going to use this for loop. So it's for. Then it's going to be a variable to use as the counter. So I'm going to use x. Then the command is in range. And I have to send it the number. So the number is how many times it's going to go around. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'd send it 5 because it goes around 5 times starting at 0. Colons at the end. That would be necessary because otherwise you'll have a syntax error. Inside here, we need, and remember you have to indent because not indenting it would break it, not just for maintainability, also for scope for Python. Total equals total plus what? Where are we getting the value? Name of the array, mins played. And then we open a bracket. Remember, we labeled this earlier. The first column was for what? The first column was for student. And it says that it's student 2. So it will always be 2, comma. The next index is for the day. First time we want it to be 0, then we want it to be 1, then 2, then 3. And if we put in, say, 1 here, what's going to happen is it will just look at Monday repeatedly. That's not what we want. What do we want to put in here? We want to put the x. Why do we want to put the x? In the for loop, the x will be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and then finally 4, and then finished. Total will have been added up, and at the end of it, we need to output it. Don't put it here. If you put it here, it prints it every single time. Put it over here. We have print, open brackets, and then we can put in total. We won't need to cast the total to a string in this case because we're just putting it on its own. If you wanted to append some text to it, then you would have to convert, or cast I should say, to a string. Okay, we have some new questions here which require us to understand both two-dimensional arrays and functions. So we'll see what we've managed to learn. Let's read through the question. OCR Tech is an online shop that sells electronics such as TVs and game consoles. Items for sale are stored in the database table stock. An extract of this is shown below. So this is having a look at a table. You can see we've got item code as a field, some codes here, linking to the name, price, and stock. Okay, so, and the whole table is called table stock. And you can imagine this is a little bit like a two-dimensional array. Now we're actually not going to be touching this again for a little while. This is setting us up for a later question on SQL. Let's start reading the next section. Customers can use a discount code to reduce the price of their purchase. Valid discount codes and their value in pounds are stored in a global, remember that's a variable that can be seen throughout the code, two-dimensional array with the identified discount. So here is our two-dimensional array. We can see that we've got index 0 and 1 and 0, 1, 2 down here. We discussed previously that it's not necessarily going to be clear to you whether 10 is going to be in position 0, 1 or 1, 0. So what's always done for you is they give an example. So for example, discount 20 holds BGF2. So we can see that that 2 is for this side and 0 is for this side. I've taken the opportunity to label then these as Y, 0, 1 and 2 and these as X. So we're going in this direction as X. I said that then the first of the two values is Y, so that's the 2. The second one is 0 there, so it'll give you BGF2. This one here, 2 and 1, I'm saying 2 is Y, so it'll be that one there. 1 is X, so that one there, so give me 15. And it does say that it's £15 here. Really important that we index the array the right way around. Great. Now the next thing it says is a function searches through the two-dimensional array and applies a discount to the price. So it goes through and it looks for your discount code. And let's say you got CPU 5, well then you have a discount of £5. The price and the discount are passed in as parameters. Now do you remember parameters were in a function or a subprogram? Those are the values that it can be sent as inputs. You could have no parameters, you could have 1, you could have 2. In this case, it's been sent 2 parameter values, the price and the discount code. If you look on the right, we can see this in effect. We have an incomplete algorithm. These are the 2 parameter values, price and code. It's a function. Let's remember, a function is a subroutine or a subprogram that returns a value. So somewhere it should return, and the name of the subroutine is check discount. So let's take a moment to process what we've been told. We are going to be given the original price, so $249.99. And then we're going to be given a code. And the code is going to look through our two-dimensional array and say, hey, is it one of these? If it's CPU 5, you should take off £5. If it's BGF2, it should be given £15 and then return that new price. So that's the goal. New price equals price. So we're making a copy of that original price, whether it's $59.99 or $400, whatever had been sent, and we're keeping a local copy of it. Then we're saying the size is len discount. Now, do you remember what len was about? Len was about finding the length of something. Now, it's actually a bit risky to do length on a two-dimensional array because the question is, do you mean the length in this direction or in this direction? But that's what they've done. Minus 1. So that's saying the size. And it's saying for x equals 0. Okay, now what do we normally do when we use a for loop, when we step through an array? What we're trying to do is we're making use of the size of it, or the size of it minus 1 to get there. So I think the first thing we'll want to be doing here is saying it's x equals 0 to size. So this means we're going to be stepping through the array. The next thing it's saying, if discount, so discount is the name of our two-dimensional array, x, so x was what I've labeled as y. Oh, that's confusing. So it'll be 0, 1, or 2. So it'll be this one. So it's going to look in this, then it's going to look here, then it's going to look here. At position 0, so it's going to look in that one. So it's going to be 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0. So it's going to look for the code. Okay. And we sent it as an argument. We sent it the code. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking to see is if that code that we've been sent is one of these. So we're saying it's equal to that code. Okay, well, if it is equal to one of the codes, so let's say it's equal to BGF2, then we're going to have to use this, aren't we? The £15. So the new price would be equal to new price, take away what discount? Well, the discount we found in position x, comma, but this time not in 0, in 1. So new price equals the new price. We found the discount code at x, so let's say x had gone up to 1. So 1, 0, it was CPU 5. Well, then we should use the discount found at 111 at position 5. So it's taken away whatever that price is. The for loop terminates. Either you found the code or you haven't. If you found the code, it updated the new price. If the code wasn't there, you'd be left with the original price. And at the end, it's a function. So like we say, that's something that returns a value. So it's going to return something. Think about what it's going to return. It's going to return the new price. Excellent. Okay. Final question. We're going to have a look in here to identify two variables used in this function. Now, please don't confuse parameters with variables. We can use them like this, but they are not variables. The variable would be new price, size, and the X counter. That would be it. So pick two of those. Great stuff. Let's go to the next question. So this is a continuation from the last question. If you skipped ahead to here, you definitely want to go to the previous one where we talked through this section on the left. Let's go look at the new content, the new information. So write a program that, and they've done some decomposition, they've broken it down for us. We need to ask the user for an item price and discount code. Okay. Use the check discount function from part 1. Do you remember that's when you could send it a price and a code, and it would return the new price to calculate the price of the item after any discount has been applied. Repeat bullet points 1 and 2 until a price of 0 is entered. Output the total cost of all items entered after any discount has been applied. Brilliant. Okay, so there's a repeat going on here. Remember, for repeats, we use iteration, for loops or while loops. For loops is when we know how many times we're going to go around, and while loops are when we don't know. They're called logic controlled. Which one do you think we need to use? You see here, it's saying repeat bullet points 1 and 2, these two, until the price of 0 is entered. Well, that might take 10 times or 3 times, or it might do it straight away. Because we don't know how many times it's going to go around, we'll need to use a while loop. And what we're going to check for? Well, we need to check that the price is not equal to 0. Because we need to check the price is not equal to 0, we probably should initialize the price as being something else so it doesn't trigger straight away. Then we will repeat these two. These two will be inside the loop. In fact, the first thing you do is ask for the new price and discount. We also need to be able to create the complete total. So we need a variable called total, and we need to initialize it to 0. Be careful not to put that inside the while loop, because otherwise you're going to be resetting it to 0 every single time. So I said we're going to start this off by having total equals 0. Price could equal, I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as it's not 0. So we could say -1, for instance. So let's kick off and do that. And we're doing this in high-level programming language, so we're going to do this in Python. Okay, now we have the total and price. Then we need to start writing our while loop. Remember, a while loop is logic controlled. So a bit like an if statement, you need to say, what are we looking for? Well, we need to keep going around, keep looping, while the price is not equal to 0. The command for not equal to is !equals 0. So as long as that's true, it will keep looping around. The very first thing we need to do after that is take in the price and take in the code. Now the price is a float, and the code is a string. So think about that when you're doing it. Remember, we're doing it in Python. So we have price. We take it in as an input, but we cast it into a float. What we have to do for code, because we're looking at a string, we can just use an input. Right. The next thing we're doing is we need to find the price of this good with this code attached. So let's do that now. I'm going to make use of a new variable called temp to allow me to record that value. Now we have to do a bit of remembering about how to use functions. So how do we access a function or a subroutine? We call it. What's the name of it? It's check discount. Now if you remember, what we have next is we open brackets and then we send it any parameter values it needs. In our case, those parameter values need to be in the same order that the function receives it. And that was first price. So we'll send this price, and then it's a comma for the next subroutine, and then it's code. So let's do that. When you send it the price and code, it then returns the new price. And you know, I'm looking at this here, and I'm remembering for maintainability, I should use meaningful variable names. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's the temp value, but you know what would be better? Maybe something like new price. Great, so that's the new price. Now, I now have to use this. Remember, what I want to do is have an updated total of all of the scores, all of the prices. So I should be total down here is equal to total plus new price. This loop will continue to go round and round until somebody finally puts in a price of 0. It has an unfortunate side effect that it will call this one additional time, but I suppose you're sending it, it'd only be an issue if you sent it a code that was there. That potentially could create an issue, so that's something to think about. I think for now it will do for us. And finally, what we want to do is outdate the total. Now, do we do the print there? The print for the total there? No, because then it will happen every time. Have it in line with while, and then it'll be outside of the while loop. Now, a good activity to do at this stage would be to try and implement this code in Python. Now, for this to work, you will also have to do the definition of the check discount subroutine. So, and we didn't do that entirely in Python. So I would have a go at going to the previous question, do def check discount, define it, and then underneath it, try and implement this code and have it call it. That'd be a really effective activity to do. Okay, we're having a look at SQL, or Structured Querying Language. And this is the language we use to interrogate, to find information from databases. There's actually a lot to learn, but fortunately for GCSE, we only are focused on the select command. And the select command is basically allowing us to search, to find information. That's what querying is, to query, to search, to find things. In this example, for this table results, we can see that we've got 4 fields: student name, subject, and grade. The columns, the one going down, those are fields, and we have 3 of them. Going to the right are records. Now the top layer is just the labels for the fields, so that wouldn't be a record, but Alistair, English, and 3 would be a record. Jason, art, and 5 would be a record. So there are 5 records going across in rows and 3 fields. And it's asking us to write the SQL query, the search query, to return all of the fields, so it wants all of these, for the students who take art. So we should be returning this, this, and this. So the first thing is select. For select, you say which fields you're looking for. So we could write student name, comma, subject, comma, grade. Or you can use what's called a wildcard by writing a asterisk. And the asterisk means basically select all. Either way would be acceptable. I'm going to write out each field name to talk about the fact that they have to be spelt identical to the field name. So capital S, capital N, because that's the way it's written there. And like I say, each of the fields need to be separated by a comma. As mentioned previously, an alternative to all this is just putting an asterisk down on its own. And that would be the same as saying all this, basically saying all of the fields. Okay, what's next? From. Now with from, it's saying, well, where are we getting this from? What table are we getting this from? Well, the table was discussed earlier. It was called results. So this is from results, spelled exactly the same way. the final element of the select query is where. Now this is like the specific search things. What are we actually looking for? Well, we're looking for all the students who take art. Now you can't search for students equals art because, as you can see on the table here, that doesn't exist there. Now where do you see art? Yeah, you see art in subject. So it's where subject, the field subject, contains the value art. Imagine this a bit like an if statement, which is also, remember, selection. So where, so first of all the field was subject, and then the search we were doing is we're saying equals to. Now this is the bit that is a little bit different, because in Python this would now be double equals, wouldn't it, for comparison? In SQL it's just a single equals, and then you specify the value you're looking for, which is art. But that, I would say, is quite an easy 3 marks. Let's look at some more examples. So in this example, we're going back to a previous question's look, because we had this table that was introduced to us, remember, with the item codes, item names, price, and stock. But now we're going to use it for our example of SQL. What is the name of the table? It's table stock. And how many fields has this got? That's right, it has 4 fields. How many records? 4 records. Okay, let's have a look at the question. So we have a multiple choice opportunity here. Let's read the question. Tick one box in each section to identify the correct SQL statement to select the item code and then the item name for all items that have a price of £60 or over. So for all items that have a price of £60 and over, and the 2 fields we're looking for are item code and item name. Remember, for select, that's where you're selecting the fields, and they're trying to trip you up here. It's the 2 fields separated by an and or a comma or an ampersand. Do you remember which one is correct? That's right, it's separated by commas. So it's a tick for that one there. From, the from was about selecting from the correct table. So it's literally got the word table here. It's got table stock and database. Now you remember, on table stock is the name of the table. So we're going from table stock. And then finally it says all items that have a price of £60 or over. So that is less than £60. That is greater than £60. But this is greater than or equal to £60, which is the point they were making there. Excellent. Another question on OCR. You got OCR High School, I'm sure it's a fun place to be, uses a computer system to store the data about students' conduct, i.e. their behavior, good or bad. The system records good conduct as a positive number and poor conduct as a negative number. A true or false value is also used to record whether or not a letter has been sent home about each incident. An example of the data is here. So we've got a student name, detail, point, and letter sent. So we have 4 fields. For Kirsty, homework's been forgotten, -2 points because it was a negative number for poor conduct, but a letter wasn't sent home. But Marianne, for bullying, negative points and a letter was sent home. Byron, for good effort in class, positive, but got a letter sent home. Okay. State the most appropriate data type to use to store each of the following data types. So we got student name. Okay, we got points. We got letter sent. Okay, take a moment to think. What do you think the right data type would be for these 3 things? Feel free to pause me now. So for student name, I would be saying string, because it's a string of characters we're making use of. For points, it's clearly a number. Is it a floating point or real number with decimal places, or a whole number? Well, it's a whole number. Even though it goes negative, it's still a whole number, so we'd make use of integer. And finally, for letter sent, it's either true or false, Do you remember what that's called? Begins with B, Boolean. So this is a bit of an increase in complexity. The data shown above is stored in a database called conduct. So the table is called conduct, and it wants us to write an SQL statement to select the student name field for all records that have negative points. So we'll have to remember off the top of our head what the 3 parts for an SQL query are. Do you remember what they are? So the first one is select. You should be writing these all in capital. Do you remember what the next line would be to start us off? That's from. And then the final element of an SQL query is where. Where is this the case? So, okay. You could have a go. Pause me now, see if you can get it right. Maybe a good clue. Say again, select are the fields you're selecting. From is the table. And where is the criteria of the search? What are you actually looking for? Right, pause me now, give it a go. Okay, so they specified here, they don't want to see all of the information. They want to specify the student name field. The next one is saying from the table, and you can see up near the top, it's stored in a database called conduct. So we can say, we can search in conduct. Remember, it's very important to spell it exactly as they have done. And then it says for all records that have negative points. So where, first of all, the name of the field, so where points is negative. So how would you do, if you were doing an if statement, what would be the syntax for saying it's less if it's negative? So you can say less than 0. Brilliant. Then finally, we have a question here, one marker, state the wildcard that can be used in SQL to show all fields from a table. We discussed that earlier. The wildcard is a asterisk. So maybe we do that. You can put in the word asterisk as well if you like. Brilliant. Okay, that's that question done.